Welcome to the African Union, where I am attending the 8th PIDA, Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa, event here in Addis Ababa, and I am with Ibrah. The last time we spoke, we were talking about the African Integrated Railway Network and financing options. Any progress being made? I know we've got PAP2, so highlight, unpack for me some special railway projects.
We have been actively working on all the 69 PIDA PAP2 projects, and specifically the around 16 rail infrastructure projects within that portfolio. To highlight major progress, I think on some of them I will note particularly the Uvinza-Musongati SGR between Tanzania and Burundi, where the African Development Bank commit over $600 million to support the two governments for the implementation of the project, and mainly the implementation for the Tanzanian section, and then for the Burundian section there is around 90 million grant, I think, to fast track the readiness of the project for implementation. Another SGR project that is gaining more traction is the LAPSSET Railway project, and LAPSSET Railway move from Lamu port in Kenya up to Ethiopia through South Sudan. We have been actively engaging with IGAD, which is the Regional Economic Community in charge of the project, the East African Community, to reach out development finance institutions and private sector and gather interest and support around that project. And even yesterday we are having a conversation with the African Development Bank and the IGAD under the framework of the NEPAD Infrastructure Project Preparation Facility to see how best we can really mobilize additional support for that transformative regional project.
Because LAPSSET will be transformative. I mean, when I was in the LAPSSET session, Lamu Port, now with the 3 berths, the 4th, I think, is almost ready to be commissioned. But they've already had 29 ships come through. The fertilizer ship that came through was 60,000 tons that put 2,000 trucks on the road. So it's actually very important that that project is fast-tracked.
One of the critical aspects as the AUDA-NEPAD, we keep insisting, and that's why we are very passionate about mega project like LAPSSET program, is that rail infrastructure project should not be seen as just a line of rails with locomotives on it. No, we moved from infrastructure as hardcore concrete and stones and steel to really service delivery to support business, to support community in a sustainable manner for the planet. And secondly, we are seeing also infrastructure as not an isolated issue. So we don't see rail as only rail. When you look at LAPSSET from Lamu Port to South Sudan, it's a network of rail, highways, resort cities, dams, fiber optic, and airports. And this is the model we would like to build. In West Africa, for example, though we are working on Abidjan-Lagos corridor and the Dakar-Bamako-Djibouti rail infrastructure corridor, and we are very grateful to have the Senegalese rail officials to come here and showcase the progress made on that project and the need to really gather more support to the project. But in addition to the rail, we are trying to really hook all the project with ICT project, because digitalization now is an enabler for rail. And along the rail, we are also trying to make sure that we have power generation and power transmission cable, because this rail will be electrically powered.
Yes, because we're looking for that sustainability and that green infrastructure.
Absolutely.
Yes, so I think that's one of the things that actually struck me this last week, is that I think certainly for myself, I look at the transport and the investment being, okay, it's a road or it's a rail or it's a port. I'm not really interested in the power transmission, but actually it all comes together. And
this approach is not only African, it's a global. The UN has declared the decade from 10 years from 2026 as the decade of sustainable transport infrastructure. And sustainable transport infrastructure are not just roads or rail or maritime waterways. No, these are integrated corridors that are enabled by technologies that are sustainably, environmentally sustainable, and also that are inclusive. Inclusion in the sense that they are equitable, so no one will be left behind when it's come to developing infrastructure. And that's the totally the logic in which the AUDA-NEPAD is subscribing. And throughout this PIDA week, I'm sure in the hall you will meet young people, school children, development finance institution, private sector, women organization network, youth network. That's how we see infrastructure. And when you see all this, rail is a very illustration. We used to say, where rail infrastructure goes, civilization goes. It's not a mantra, it's a fact. You can observe it. And we really want rail infrastructure to be literally the locomotive of Africa's economic transformation for the next 10 years.
Ibrah, I was quite shocked when I was listening to the opening speeches. I think it was the commissioner who said that only 3% of the financing coming through for the PIDA projects was private. And I get that the private sector is probably more excited about ICT or energy because they're quicker for bankability and quicker to get to market. But 3%, how do we change that scope?
For the first 10 years of implementation of PIDA, we have mobilized all the PIDA stakeholders, particularly the member state, over $82 billion. From that 82 billion, only 3% come purely from private sector financing. And you are right, because when you disaggregate by sector, you will realize that 74% of the PIDA project in the ICT sector got fully implemented for the first 10-year implementation. And ICT is mainly funded by private sector. So indeed, some sectors are more appealing to the private sector, but this is not a narrative that cannot be changed. Inherently, what does private sector want? Private sector want comfort, want profitability. And profitability should not be only seen as a return on investment issues. So how do we change the narrative? We change the narrative through three ways. Number one, as government, as policymakers, and as African Union, we are doing our homework. We are ensuring that these projects are very well prepared. They are bankable in the private sector lands. Secondly, we are broadening our partnership. For the first time, you have Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank at PIDA Week. You have institutions like Hyundai, like Huawei, here at the African Union headquarters, observing and discussing how to move this project forward. So we are broadening the partnership so that we can leverage our existing resources and cooperation to move this project. And thirdly, and more importantly, we are telling the private sector that bankability should not be only seen through the single lens of profitability. No, bankability should be seen as a holistic approach. For us as AUDA-NEPAD, a bankable project is a project that is indeed financially viable, it's a project that is economically viable, but also a project that is economically equitable, a project which is gender sensitive, a project which has adequately necessary political consensus and support, and it's a project that takes into account special connectivity in terms of rural to urban connectivity. It's a project that is inclusive in terms of women and young people, and more importantly, is a project that is environmentally friendly. So we are trying to channel this, to convey this message of holistic bankability to our private sector and other investors. And I think on the continent, we come collectively to agree on that. AUDA-NEPAD joined the African Development Bank and the Africa 50 to launch the Africa Green Infrastructure Alliance, AGIA, which specifically take into account these multi-dimensional issues when it comes to design transformative infrastructure projects across the sector, particularly in the rail sector.
One of the things that I understood from the last couple of days is that AUDA-NEPAD PIDA is a facilitation agencies. So for example, if I have a project and I think it's quite good, I can bring it to you as an organization to drive it for me, and that would then enable the facilitation, the intergovernmental bilateral relations, and take some of the bureaucratic headache away in terms of bringing that project online. Did I understand you correctly?
AUDA-NEPAD is the executing and facilitating agency of PIDA as the continental blueprint for infrastructure development in the framework of Agenda 2063.
And that's under the African Union Commission?
Under the African Union Commission, indeed. The process is as follows. The African Union leadership decide on a portfolio of projects that they believe is their priority to transform the continent. They provide the necessary policy directive to the African Union Commission, and the Commission now cascade those policies to the development agency of the Union, ourselves, to translate those policies into concrete projects, into concrete technical assistance and advisory services to member states to make sure that the head of state policy is translated into impactful intervention that alleviate people's life on the ground. Essentially, that is our role. And how do we do that? We do that through three ways. Number one, to engage the countries to reassess and better understand the need. Number two, to provide them with technical support to enhance the readiness for the sake of not repeating bankability, but really to enhance the readiness of those projects. And number three, to go wherever the resources is, wherever the partnership is, to build synergies so that we can fast track the financing and the implementation of those projects.
So yes, that gives it a better contextualization in terms of that.
We are not discussing infrastructure project because it's trendy, it's fashionable. No, we are discussing about infrastructure project because we truly believe it's the backbone of Africa's integration. It's the backbone for prosperity on this continent. And without infrastructure, we cannot achieve development goals. And that's why we are always available and we are always pleased to advocate and to have this conversation around infrastructure project. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ibrah. And I think what it boils down to is really putting our money where our mouth is, certainly, to achieve Agenda 2063 and even more importantly, the Africa that we want.